The desert heat shimmered like liquid fire across the rocky terrain as Commander Jake Morrison adjusted his binoculars for the third time that morning. His unit had been stationed at Forward Operating Base Phoenix for 6 months, and he thought he knew every sniper in his command. The Barrett .50 caliber rifle reports had been echoing through the valley for the past week, each shot precise and deadly. What puzzled him wasn't the accuracy, it was the location. The shots were coming from a position that wasn't on any of his deployment charts. Someone was operating independently, and in his 20 years of military service, Morrison had learned that unauthorized snipers usually meant trouble. Either it was an enemy combatant who had somehow acquired American equipment, or one of his people had gone rogue. Neither possibility sat well with him. "Sir, we've got another confirmed hit," reported Sergeant Miller, jogging up with a radio in hand. "Hostile target neutralized at approximately 1,800 meters. That makes it 7 this week." Morrison lowered his binoculars and studied the terrain map spread across the hood of his Humvee. 7 confirmed kills in 5 days, all from impossible angles, all at distances that would challenge even his most experienced marksman. The shots were coming from a ridge that his reconnaissance teams had declared too exposed and too dangerous for sustained sniper operations. "Any visual confirmation on the shooter?" Morrison asked, though he already knew the answer. For a week, his spotters had been trying to identify the mystery sniper. The shooter seemed to appear and disappear like a ghost, leaving only the devastating effectiveness of their work as evidence of their presence. "Negative, sir. By the time our teams reach the area, there's no trace. It's like they vanish into thin air." Morrison had served in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. He had worked with some of the most elite snipers in the world, men who could thread a needle at 1,000 yards. But this level of skill, combined with this level of stealth, was something beyond his experience. The enemy casualties were mounting, but so was his curiosity and concern. The Barrett .50 caliber was not a weapon for amateurs. It weighed nearly 30 pounds, required extensive training, and kicked like an angry mule. The ammunition alone cost $20 per round. Whoever was using it knew their business, and they were using it to devastating effect against enemy positions that had been troubling his unit for weeks. As the sun climbed higher, casting harsh shadows across the desert landscape, Morrison made a decision that would change everything. He was going to find this mystery sniper himself. Protocol demanded that all operations be coordinated through his command, and someone operating independently in his area of responsibility was either going to be court-martialed or recruited, depending on what he discovered. He gathered his best tracking team and set out toward the ridge where the shots had been originating. The climb was treacherous, with loose rocks and scattered boulders providing the only cover. As they approached the suspected sniper position, Morrison felt the familiar tension that came with potentially walking into an ambush. The position, when they finally reached it, was a masterpiece of fieldcraft. Someone had constructed a hide so perfectly camouflaged that even standing 5 feet away, it was nearly invisible. Spent brass casings lay scattered in a precise pattern, indicating controlled, methodical shooting. But what caught Morrison's attention was something else entirely. Carved into the rock beside the shooting position was a small symbol, a delicate flower, no bigger than a coin. It was the kind of detail that spoke of patience, artistry, and a feminine touch that seemed impossible in this harsh environment. "Sir, you need to see this," called Corporal Davis from behind a larger boulder. "We've got gear cached here, but it's not standard issue." Morrison moved to investigate and found a carefully concealed supply cache. Military meals ready to eat, water purification tablets, and medical supplies were organized with the kind of precision that spoke of professional training. But mixed among the military gear were items that told a different story: a small mirror, hair ties, and what appeared to be a worn photograph tucked into a waterproof case. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, but the picture they formed challenged everything Morrison thought he knew about the situation. As he studied the evidence, a single rifle shot echoed across the valley. Another enemy position had just been neutralized, and the shot had come from a completely different location, at least a mile away from where they currently stood. Whoever this sniper was, they were not only incredibly skilled but also incredibly mobile. They were operating with a level of tactical awareness that impressed even Morrison's veteran sensibilities. As his team prepared to move toward the new shooting position, Morrison found himself hoping that when they finally made contact, it would be under friendly circumstances. The mystery deepened with each discovery, and Morrison realized he was tracking someone whose skills might exceed those of anyone in his command. The question was no longer just who was doing the shooting, but how someone with this level of ability had ended up operating independently in his sector without his knowledge. The second shooting position told an even more remarkable story. Morrison and his team found evidence of a shooter who had eliminated 3 targets in rapid succession from a single location before moving on. The angles were mathematically perfect, each shot calculated to account for wind, elevation, and the rotation of the Earth itself. This wasn't just marksmanship, it was applied physics executed under combat conditions. "Commander, this doesn't make sense," said Sergeant Miller, studying the trajectory calculations scratched into the dirt. "These shots were taken in a 47-second window. The targets were at different ranges, different elevations. The calculations alone should have taken minutes." Morrison knelt beside the markings and felt a chill despite the desert heat. The mathematical notations were precise, professional, and executed in handwriting that was unmistakably feminine. Whoever was behind the Barrett 50 was not only an exceptional shooter but also possessed an advanced understanding of ballistics that rivaled his best-trained snipers. The team followed the trail for 3 more hours, discovering a pattern of movement that demonstrated tactical sophistication beyond anything Morrison had expected. The shooter was using natural terrain features to remain invisible while maintaining overwatch on key enemy positions. Each shooting site was chosen not just for its tactical advantage but for its escape routes. As they reached the 4th position, Morrison's radio crackled to life. "Phoenix Base to Commander Morrison. We have enemy movement in Sector 7. Large force estimated 40 to 50 hostiles moving toward your position." Morrison's blood ran cold. They had been tracking the mystery sniper for hours, completely focused on their hunt, and had walked into what appeared to be a coordinated enemy attack. His small team was exposed on the ridge miles from backup, with enemy forces converging on their position. "All units, defensive positions," Morrison ordered. But even as he spoke, he realized their situation was nearly hopeless. They had perhaps 10 minutes before they would be surrounded and outnumbered 5-1. That's when the Barrett 50 spoke again. The shot came from a position Morrison would have sworn was empty just minutes before. An enemy machine gunner who had been setting up to pin down Morrison's team simply ceased to exist above the waist. The devastating impact of the 50 caliber round was followed immediately by a second shot that eliminated the enemy radio operator. Morrison watched through his binoculars as chaos erupted in the enemy formation. Their coordinated advance dissolved into confusion as their leadership was systematically eliminated by an invisible sniper. Shot after shot rang out, each one perfectly placed, each one removing a key piece of the enemy's tactical advantage. "Sir, whoever that is, they're saving our lives," reported Corporal Davis, awe evident in his voice. The enemy force, which had numbered nearly 50 men, began a hasty retreat after losing their commander, radio operator, 2 machine gun teams, and their mortar crew to the mysterious sniper. In less than 15 minutes, a potentially devastating attack had been reduced to a routed retreat. As the desert fell silent again, Morrison made a decision that went against every protocol in his training manual. Instead of calling for backup and establishing a secure perimeter, he ordered his team to move toward the position where the shots had originated. "Sir, that might not be wise," cautioned Sergeant Miller. "We don't know if this shooter is friendly or just happened to have the same enemies we do." Morrison understood the concern, but something about the precision and timing of the intervention convinced him that whoever was behind that rifle had deliberately saved his team. The shots hadn't just been accurate, they had been perfectly prioritized to neutralize the greatest threats. First, the climb to the sniper's position took 20 minutes of careful movement across exposed terrain. Morrison's team moved with weapons ready but not raised, prepared for either a friendly encounter or a hostile one. As they approached the coordinates where the shots had originated, Morrison called out in clear English, "This is Commander Morrison, United States Army. Identify yourself." The response came not as words but as movement. A section of what Morrison had taken for natural rock formation shifted slightly, revealing itself to be an expertly constructed ghillie suit. The camouflage was so perfect that even knowing where to look, Morrison could barely distinguish the sniper from the surrounding terrain. What emerged from the hide challenged every assumption Morrison had made about the mystery marksman. The figure was smaller than he had expected, moving with fluid grace that spoke of exceptional physical conditioning. The Barrett 50 was handled with the casual familiarity of someone who had spent thousands of hours training with the weapon. As the ghillie suit hood was pulled back, Morrison found himself looking at a young woman whose eyes held the calm intensity of a professional killer. Her face was streaked with camouflage paint, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her expression was that of someone who had just completed a routine task, rather than saved the lives of 5 American soldiers. Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez. "Sir," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent that Morrison couldn't immediately place. "I've been tracking that enemy unit for 2 days, waiting for them to commit to an attack so I could eliminate their leadership." Morrison stared at the young woman who couldn't have been more than 25 years old, holding a rifle that weighed nearly as much as she did, having just demonstrated shooting skills that surpassed those of snipers with decades of experience. The mystery was beginning to resolve itself, but the questions it raised were even more complex than those it answered. Elena's eyes grew distant as she recalled that day in Afghanistan, her hands unconsciously checking the Barrett 50 that had made history with her. The weapon was more than just equipment to her. It was a partner that had never let her down when lives depended on accuracy measured in inches at impossible distances. It was March 15th. In the mountains outside Kandahar, Elena began, her voice taking on the measured tone of someone recounting a technical operation, rather than a life-and-death moment. Intelligence had identified a Taliban commander named Hassan al-Zarqawi, who was coordinating attacks against relief convoys bringing supplies to displaced families. Morrison and his team listened intently as Elena described a situation that highlighted the brutal calculations of modern warfare. The Taliban commander had positioned himself in a fortified compound that was surrounded by civilian housing. Any conventional attack would have resulted in innocent casualties, but his presence was enabling attacks that were killing aid workers and preventing food and medical supplies from reaching thousands of refugees. The conventional wisdom was that he was untouchable, Elena continued. The compound was on a mountaintop surrounded by villages full of non-combatants. Drone strikes were ruled out due to collateral damage concerns. Special forces insertion would have required fighting through populated areas. For 3 weeks, this one man was effectively holding thousands of civilians hostage through his tactical position. The frustration in Elena's voice revealed how personal the mission had become for her. This wasn't just about eliminating an enemy combatant. It was about protecting innocent people who were suffering because conventional military options were inadequate for the specific tactical situation. "My spotter and I set up on a ridge that intelligence had dismissed as too far away to be tactically relevant," Elena said, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. 2,147 meters according to our laser rangefinder. At that distance, the bullet drop would be over 30 feet, and the flight time would be 4.2 seconds. A target could literally take several steps between the trigger pull and impact. Morrison tried to visualize the mathematics involved in such a shot. At nearly 3 kilometers, Elena would have had to account for wind speed at multiple altitudes as the bullet traveled through different atmospheric layers. The rotation of the Earth itself would affect the bullet's path over such a distance, requiring calculations that pushed the limits of ballistic science. The weather conditions were actually perfect, Elena continued. Clear skies, minimal wind, consistent temperature. But the real challenge wasn't the environmental factors, it was the timing. Al-Zarqawi only exposed himself for a few seconds at a time when he came out to address his fighters. Elena described spending 18 hours in position, studying the target's patterns through her scope. She mapped his movements with scientific precision, noting that he appeared on a specific balcony for an average of 8 seconds every 2 hours and 43 minutes. The regularity of his schedule would provide her opportunity, but the window for success would be measured in heartbeats. The shot had to be perfect, Elena explained, her voice growing quiet. At that distance, with that flight time, I had to predict exactly where he would be when the bullet arrived. I couldn't just aim at where he was. I had to aim at where he would be 4 seconds in the future. Morrison found himself holding his breath as Elena described the moment of the shot. She had waited for the perfect atmospheric conditions, calculated the precise trajectory, and then had to trust in mathematics and instinct as she squeezed the trigger on a shot that would travel for over 4 seconds before reaching its Target. The bullet left the barrel at 2,800 feet per second, Elena said, her eyes focused on something beyond the desert horizon. For 4.2 seconds, everything depended on physics and prayer. I watched through the scope as Al-Zarqawi stepped onto the balcony right on schedule, moved to his usual position, and then simply wasn't there anymore. The clinical nature of Elena's description couldn't hide the emotional weight of what she had accomplished. A single bullet, fired from a distance that seemed impossible, had eliminated a threat that conventional military wisdom had deemed untouchable. More importantly, it had done so without risking a single civilian life. The confirmation came through intelligence channels 3 days later, Elena concluded. Hassan al-Zarqawi was dead. His organization had collapsed without his leadership, and relief convoys were reaching the refugee camps again. One shot, one target, thousands of lives saved. Morrison realized he was looking at a soldier whose capabilities represented the cutting edge of what was possible in modern warfare. Elena Vasquez had pushed the boundaries of marksmanship beyond what most people would consider achievable, and she had done it in service of protecting innocent people who had no other defense. "Sergeant," Morrison said quietly, "that shot didn't just set a record. It redefined what's possible in precision warfare." Elena nodded, but her expression remained humble. "Sir, the Barrett 50 is capable of much more than most people realize. The limitation isn't the weapon. It's the shooter's ability to understand and work with the physics involved. That shot in Afghanistan wasn't magic. It was just mathematics applied under combat conditions." Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez stood before Commander Morrison like a living contradiction. She couldn't have weighed more than 130 pounds, yet she handled the massive Barrett 50 with the same ease most soldiers handled their standard rifles. Her uniform bore the insignia of the 75th Ranger Regiment, but Morrison had no record of any female snipers being deployed to his sector. "Sergeant Vasquez, I need to see your orders and deployment paperwork," Morrison said, trying to maintain his command authority while processing what he was witnessing. "You've been operating in my area of responsibility without my knowledge for over a week." Elena reached into her gear and produced a waterproof document case. Inside were orders that made Morrison's jaw drop. She wasn't just assigned to special operations. She was on loan from a classified program that Morrison's security clearance had never given him access to. Her mission parameters were stamped with authorization codes that came from so far up the chain of command that questioning them would require him to contact the Pentagon directly. "Sir, I'm assigned to Hunter Killer Team 7, Elena explained, her voice carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to operating independently. "My mission is to eliminate high-value targets and provide overwatch for conventional forces when tactically advantageous. I wasn't supposed to make contact unless absolutely necessary." Morrison studied the documents, noting details that painted a picture of a soldier whose capabilities far exceeded anything in his experience. Elena had completed not only Ranger School, but also the Army's most advanced sniper training programs. Her service record included deployments to conflicts that weren't supposed to exist, and commendations from officers whose names were redacted for security purposes. "These shots you've been taking," Morrison said, handing back her papers. "The ranges, the accuracy, how is that possible? Some of these kills were at distances that push the absolute limits of the Barrett 50. Elena's expression shifted slightly, revealing a hint of pride mixed with something that might have been sadness. "Sir, I hold the current record for longest confirmed kill by a female sniper. Tyson at 47 meters in Afghanistan 18 months ago. The Barrett 50 and I have an understanding." The number hit Morrison like a physical blow. Two site of 47 meters, nearly 3 kilometers. At that distance, the bullet would have been in the air for over 4 seconds, requiring calculations that accounted for every variable from humidity to the Coriolis effect caused by the Earth's rotation. It was a shot that belonged in the record books, and apparently it already was. "That's almost 2 miles, Sergeant Miller whispered, unable to hide his amazement. "Ma'am, that's not just shooting. That's like artillery with a single bullet." Elena nodded matter-of-factly. The target was a Taliban commander who had been coordinating attacks against a village that was harboring displaced families. Conventional artillery would have caused civilian casualties. The shot was clean, precise, and eliminated the threat without collateral damage. Morrison found himself reevaluating everything he thought he knew about modern warfare. The idea that a single soldier could eliminate threats at distances that required minutes of bullet flight time seemed like science fiction. Yet the evidence was standing before him holding the weapon that made it possible. The enemy forces that were moving against us, Morrison continued. How did you know they were coming? I've been tracking them for 3 days, sir. They've been using the same route to stage attacks against forward positions. I was waiting for them to commit to a major assault, so I could eliminate their leadership structure in a single engagement. Your presence provided the opportunity I needed. The tactical sophistication of Elena's approach impressed Morrison even more than her marksmanship. She wasn't just an exceptional shooter. She was a strategic thinker who could see patterns and plan operations that spanned days or weeks. Her lone wolf approach wasn't reckless independence. It was calculated warfare executed at a level that most military planners couldn't conceive. Sergeant, I need to understand something, Morrison said, studying Elena's face for any sign of deception. You've been operating alone in hostile territory for over a week. No backup, no support team, no extraction plan. How do you survive out here? Elena's smile was thin but genuine. Sir, I was raised in the mountains of Colorado by a father who believed that if you couldn't survive alone in the wilderness for a month with nothing but a knife and a water bottle, you weren't ready to call yourself a soldier. The desert is actually easier than the mountains in winter. Morrison began to understand that Elena Vasquez wasn't just an exceptional sniper. She was the product of a childhood that had prepared her for exactly this kind of warfare. Her skills weren't just the result of military training. They were the evolution of abilities that had been developing since she was old enough to hold a rifle. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Morrison realized that his discovery of Elena raised questions about the nature of modern warfare itself. In an age of drones and satellite guidance systems, here was a soldier whose effectiveness came from the oldest military skills: fieldcraft, marksmanship, and the ability to survive and operate independently in hostile territory. Sergeant Vasquez, Morrison said finally, I think it's time you told me about that record-breaking shot in Afghanistan. Something tells me there's more to that story than just exceptional marksmanship. As the sun began to set over the desert, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain, Commander Morrison found himself curious about the origins of Elena's extraordinary abilities. A shot like the one she had described in Afghanistan didn't happen by accident. It was the result of training and preparation that went far beyond standard military sniper programs. Sergeant Vasquez, where did you learn to shoot like that? Morrison asked, settling against a boulder as his team maintained security around their position. That level of precision isn't something you can pick up in basic sniper school. Elena's expression softened slightly, revealing a hint of the person behind the professional soldier. Sir, my story starts long before I ever wore a uniform. My father, Miguel Vasquez, was a competitive long-range shooter who spent his weekends traveling to matches across the western United States. He believed that precision shooting was equal parts science, art, and meditation. She paused, checking the horizon through her scope before continuing. I started shooting when I was 8 years old, beginning with a .22 caliber rifle that was almost as big as I was. Dad didn't believe in starting with easy targets. His philosophy was that if you could hit a dime at 100 yards with a .22, everything else was just scaling up the mathematics. Morrison tried to imagine an 8-year-old girl learning the fundamentals of precision shooting while most children her age were playing video games. The dedication required to develop Elena's level of skill would have consumed most of her childhood and adolescence. By the time I was 12, I was competing in junior precision rifle competitions. Elena continued. Dad taught me that shooting wasn't about luck or natural talent. It was about understanding ballistics, reading environmental conditions, and maintaining perfect consistency in body position and breathing. Every shot was a physics problem that had to be solved correctly. Elena described a childhood that was structured around the pursuit of shooting excellence. Her father had constructed a private shooting range on their property in Colorado, with targets placed at distances ranging from 100 to 1,500 yards. While other teenagers were attending football games and school dances, Elena was studying wind patterns and practicing trigger control. The real breakthrough came when I was 16, Elena said, a note of pride entering her voice. Dad entered me in the National Long Range Championship, competing against adult shooters who had been perfecting their craft for decades. The longest target was at 1,200 yards, which was farther than I had ever attempted in competition. Morrison could see where the story was leading, but he was fascinated by the progression of skills that had created a world-class marksman before Elena had even graduated from high school. "I won that competition with a perfect score," Elena said simply. 20 shots at 200 yards, all within a 4-inch circle. The runner-up was a retired Marine sniper with 2 tours in Vietnam. After the match, he pulled me aside and said that my shooting was beyond anything he had seen in 40 years of competition and combat. The retired Marine, Elena explained, had recommended her for a special recruitment program that identified exceptional shooters for advanced military training. By the time she enlisted at age 18, Elena was already performing at a level that surpassed most career snipers. Military sniper training was actually easier than the competitions I had been winning, Elena admitted. The Army's standards were incredibly high, but they were still below what Dad had been demanding of me since I was a child. The instructors initially thought there was something wrong with their equipment because my groups were tighter than they had ever recorded. Elena described progressing through increasingly specialized training programs, each one designed to push the boundaries of what was considered possible in precision shooting. She learned to account for factors that most snipers never encountered: the effect of air pressure changes at extreme altitudes, the impact of temperature variations on bullet trajectory, and the complex mathematics required for shots at distances beyond 2,000 meters. The Barrett 50 training was where everything came together, Elena said, patting the massive rifle with obvious affection. This weapon system is capable of accuracy that most people can't comprehend, but it requires a shooter who understands advanced ballistics and can perform complex calculations under combat stress. Morrison realized that Elena's record-breaking shot in Afghanistan hadn't been a lucky accident. It had been the inevitable result of nearly 2 decades of preparation and training. Her childhood had been deliberately structured to create a shooter capable of performing at the absolute limits of what was physically possible. Dad always said that precision shooting was like playing a musical instrument, Elena concluded. You could teach someone the notes and the techniques, but creating music required something deeper, an understanding that came from years of practice and an intuitive connection between the shooter, the weapon, and the target. As darkness began to fall over the desert, Morrison understood that he was in the presence of someone whose abilities represented the pinnacle of human achievement in precision marksmanship. Elena Vasquez hadn't just broken records. She had redefined what was possible when human skill was combined with advanced technology and perfect preparation. "Sergeant," Morrison said quietly, "your father created something extraordinary. The question now is how we use these abilities to their fullest potential." 3 days after his encounter with Elena Vasquez, Commander Morrison received orders that would put her extraordinary abilities to their ultimate test. Intelligence had identified a high-value target whose elimination could potentially end the insurgent activities that had been plaguing the region for months. "Sergeant Vasquez, we have a problem that requires your specific skill set," Morrison said as Elena reported to his command tent. "There's a terrorist leader named Khalid Rahman who has been coordinating attacks from a compound in the mountains. Every conventional approach has failed, and the situation is getting worse every day." Elena studied the aerial photographs and intelligence reports that Morrison spread across his field table. The target compound was positioned on a narrow mountain ridge, surrounded by steep cliffs that made ground assault nearly impossible. The approach routes were heavily defended, and the compound itself was fortified against conventional weapons. "Sir, what makes this target different from the others?" Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Rahman isn't just hiding behind walls and guards," Morrison explained. "He's using human shields. Intelligence indicates that he's holding approximately 30 civilian hostages inside the compound, including women and children from the local villages. Any conventional attack would result in massive civilian casualties." Elena nodded grimly. This was exactly the type of situation where her unique capabilities could make the difference between success and disaster. A precision shot could eliminate Rahman without endangering the hostages, but the tactical challenges were unlike anything she had previously encountered. "The range to target is 3,200 meters, Morrison continued, pointing to the elevation charts. "That's beyond the confirmed range of any sniper kill in military history." The shot would have to travel across a valley with unpredictable wind patterns, and the target exposure window is estimated at less than 5 seconds. Elena studied the topographical maps, noting the extreme elevation changes between the proposed shooting position and the target compound. At 3,200 meters, the bullet would be in flight for nearly 5 seconds, during which time atmospheric conditions could change significantly. The mathematical calculations required would push beyond the limits of established ballistic science. "Sir, this shot is theoretically possible," Elena said after several minutes of analysis, "but it would require perfect conditions and precise intelligence about the target's movement patterns. We would get exactly one opportunity, and failure would likely result in Rahman disappearing permanently." Morrison had expected this assessment. The mission was being proposed because Elena's demonstrated capabilities suggested she might be the only person in the world capable of making such a shot successfully. The strategic importance of eliminating Rahman while preserving the hostages justified the extreme risk. "Intelligence has been monitoring Rahman's routine for 2 weeks, Morrison explained. "Every day at 1400 hours, he appears on the compound's main balcony for approximately 4 seconds to observe the surrounding terrain through binoculars. That's our window." Elena requested 48 hours to study the target area and atmospheric conditions. She spent the next 2 days in intensive preparation, using advanced ballistic software to model every variable that could affect the bullet's trajectory. The calculations filled 3 notebooks with mathematical formulas that resembled advanced physics more than traditional military planning. The shooting position Elena selected was a rocky outcropping that provided a clear line of sight to the target compound while offering concealment from enemy observation. The position required a grueling 6-hour climb, carrying the Barrett 50 and supporting equipment, but it provided the optimal angle for the impossible shot. "Sir, I need to establish something before we proceed," Elena said as Morrison's team prepared to move into position. "At this range, with these conditions, the margin for error is effectively 0. Wind speed variations of even 2 miles per hour could cause a complete miss. Temperature changes of 5 degrees could affect bullet velocity enough to alter the trajectory significantly." Morrison understood the implications. They were attempting something that existed at the very edge of what was physically possible, relying on Elena's ability to solve a ballistic equation with variables that couldn't be completely controlled or predicted. On the morning of the mission, Elena spent 3 hours in position, studying atmospheric conditions through her scope and refining her calculations based on real-time observations. The wind patterns in the valley were complex, with different air currents at various altitudes affecting the bullet's path throughout its 5-second flight. "Target acquired," Elena whispered into her radio at 13:55 hours. "Atmospheric conditions are within acceptable parameters. Standing by for target exposure." Morrison watched through his own binoculars as the seconds ticked toward 1400 hours. Somewhere in that distant compound, 30 innocent hostages were waiting for rescue that would come in the form of a single bullet fired from an impossible distance. At exactly 1400 hours, a figure appeared on the balcony of the target compound. Elena's voice came across the radio with the calm precision of someone performing a routine task, rather than attempting to rewrite the record books of military history. "Rifle," she said, beginning the sniper's traditional shot sequence. The single word meant that she had identified her target and was preparing to fire. What followed would either save 30 innocent lives or demonstrate that some challenges remained beyond the reach of human capability. "Send it," Morrison whispered, though he knew Elena couldn't hear him at that distance. Elena's finger found the trigger of the Barrett 50 as Khalid Rahman stepped onto the balcony 3,200 meters away. Through her scope, she could see him clearly, a man whose actions had terrorized the region for months, now holding binoculars as he surveyed the valley below, completely unaware that death was calculating his precise location from an impossible distance. The mathematical equation that would determine the outcome of the next 5 seconds was unlike anything attempted in the history of warfare. Elena had to account for bullet drop of over 40 feet at that distance, wind drift that could vary at different altitudes, the rotation of the Earth itself, and the target's potential movement during the bullet's flight time. "Wind steady at 6 miles per hour from the southwest," Elena whispered into her radio, more for her own mental confirmation than for Morrison's benefit. Temperature 78 degrees, barometric pressure 29.92 inches. All calculations confirmed. The scope's crosshairs settled on a point 18 inches to the left and 37 feet above Rahman's current position. The location where ballistic science predicted he would be when the bullet completed its 5-second journey. Elena's breathing slowed to the deliberate rhythm she had practiced since childhood, her heart rate dropping as her body entered the zone of perfect concentration that her father had taught her to achieve. "Shot," Elena announced, squeezing the trigger with the same precise pressure she had applied thousands of times in training and combat. The Barrett 50 roared with its characteristic thunderous report, the massive rifle's recoil absorbed by Elena's perfectly positioned body and the weapon's advanced muzzle brake system. The 50 caliber bullet left the barrel at 2,800 feet per second, beginning a journey that would test the absolute limits of ballistic science and human capability. Morrison watched through his binoculars, counting off the seconds as the bullet traveled across the valley. At this distance, he couldn't see the projectile itself, only Rahman's figure on the distant balcony, still holding his binoculars and studying the terrain below. 1 second. The bullet was traveling at supersonic speed through the thin mountain air, its trajectory calculated to account for gravitational drop and atmospheric resistance. 2 seconds. Wind currents at different altitudes were affecting the bullet's path, exactly as Elena's calculations had predicted, the projectile maintaining its course toward the predetermined intercept point. 3 seconds. Rahman lowered his binoculars and turned slightly to his left, moving precisely as Elena's intelligence analysis had suggested he would. 4 seconds. The bullet was now dropping rapidly as gravity overcame its initial velocity, following the parabolic arc that Elena had plotted with mathematical precision. 5 seconds. Rahman stepped to the exact position where Elena's calculations had predicted he would be. The impact was instantaneous and decisive. At 3,200 meters, the bullet retained enough energy to complete its mission with devastating effectiveness. Khalid Rahman, the terrorist leader who had evaded conventional military forces for months, simply ceased to exist as a threat to innocent people. Target eliminated. Elena's voice came across the radio with the same calm professionalism she had displayed throughout the preparation. Confirmed kill at 3,200 meters. Morrison felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. He had just witnessed the longest confirmed sniper kill in military history, a shot that pushed beyond the theoretical limits of what had been considered possible. Elena Vasquez had not only broken her own record, she had redefined the science of precision shooting. The rescue of the 30 hostages proceeded without complications once Rahman's organization lost its leadership. Elite forces that had been standing by for weeks were finally able to approach the compound safely, knowing that the primary threat had been eliminated with surgical precision. In the official after-action reports, the details of Elena's shot were classified at the highest levels of military secrecy. The strategic implications of having a sniper capable of eliminating threats at distances approaching 2 miles were too significant to be made public knowledge. Commander, Morrison's final report contained a single recommendation that would change Elena's career forever: immediate promotion and assignment to the most elite special operations units in the American military. Her capabilities had transcended normal military categories, placing her in a class of warrior that existed beyond conventional understanding. Months later, as Elena prepared for her next deployment to an undisclosed location, she reflected on the shot that had made her a legend in military circles that most people would never know existed. The Barrett 50 that had delivered that impossible bullet was now part of military history, but for Elena, it remained simply a tool for protecting innocent people from those who would do them harm. The record she had set, 3,200 meters, confirmed through multiple intelligence sources and witnessed by military personnel whose testimony would never be made public, represented more than just exceptional marksmanship. It demonstrated that the combination of human skill, advanced technology, and perfect preparation could achieve results that seemed to defy the laws of physics themselves. Elena Vasquez had proven that in the hands of the right person, a single rifle could reach across vast distances to deliver justice with mathematical precision. The shot that rewrote the record books had also saved 30 innocent lives and eliminated a threat that conventional warfare had been unable to address, as She prepared for missions that would remain classified for decades. Elena carried with her the knowledge that she had pushed the boundaries of what was possible in warfare, setting a standard that might never be equaled. The Barrett 50 had found its perfect partner, and together they had written a chapter in military history that would inspire and terrify in equal measure.